Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Determination of cost of capital. In order to determine the cost of capital, as you can see here, basically I have classified the source of fund into several parts. Here, the source of funds are divided into four types. It means if you want to determine the cost of capital, so you have to determine the cost of capital for equity share, you have to find out the cost of capital for return earning, as well as you have to find out cost of preference for preference shareholder share capital, as well as you have to find out cost of debt. And later on, after this one, you have to find out the overall cost of capital for the business for the company itself. So first you have to find out for equity. Also, you need to find out cost for return earning, for preference, and for debt. Then you can find out the average cost of capital for the business. Equity preference share and return earning is called equity shareholder fund. It means if you combine these two sources of fund, in the business, so for this one we can call equity shareholder fund, right? If you combine the third one as well, it means you combine equity, return earning, and preference. This is called shareholder fund. So we remove the equity. Why? Because in this case, preference is also included. What is equity and what is preference? You may know it, but otherwise, I'm going to explain it a little bit. What is equity? But if you include the last one as well, for example, equity, return earning, and preference, and debt, then you can call it total capital employed. So if someone said total capital employed, then you have to understand it includes these four types: preference, equity, return earning, and debt. If someone said shareholder fund, then you have to understand this is preference shareholder plus return earning plus equity. If someone said equity shareholder fund, then you have to understand this is only point number one and point number two. So from financial management, you may know basically there are two sources of funds. How many sources of funds? If mentioned sources of funds. Two sources of funds are there in the business. What are the two sources of funds? These are basically the two sources of funds. One source of fund is called equity source of funds. What source of fund? Equity. And the other source of fund is called what? Debt source of funds, right? Debt and equity, right? So first of all, let us talk about the equity. Anyone who provides capital to the business, under equity source of fund, they can be called as owner of the business. Can be called as what? As owner. Anyone who provide capital to the business under this one, under equity, let me highlight this one, right? Or make it at least bullet. So anyone who provide capital to the business under equity, they are basically owner of the business, right? But anyone who provide capital to the business under debt, basically they are the lenders, right? One difference. Second difference is anyone who provide capital to the business under this one, debt, basically they charge the fixed interest. They charge what? Fixed rate of interest. They charge the fixed rate of interest. Whether the business make profit or whether the business suffer loss, so the business should pay the fixed rate of interest for these people. For example, you take loan from the market and they charge 10% profit or 15% profit or whatever. This is called fixed rate of interest, right? Sometimes it can be variable as well, but of course there is an interest. Whether you make profit or whether you suffer loss, but you have to pay something, right? And anyone who provide capital to this one under equity, of course, they do not charge fixed rate of profit. So they go for profit and loss sharing. They go for what? For profit and loss sharing. If the business made profit, they receive profit. If the business suffer loss, so they will receive a loss, right? So these are the points that you can do. These people participate in the management, but of course, these people cannot participate in the management itself, right? So these are the difference regarding the two source of fund. Next, even this equity itself can be divided into two parts. Equity can be divided into two parts, right? Equity itself can be divided into two parts. Equity can be, for example, common share. Equity can be common share, and of course, equity can be preference share. Right? Preference share, right? So two source of or two shares can be there. Equity share, or when we say equity, of course, our purpose is equity share, right? You have to say equity share itself. So equity share itself is divided into two parts. Let us mention share here as well. Equity share. Equity share can be preference share. Equity share can be common share. If it is preference share, basically preference shares are those shares which they have a preferential right. What they have? They have preferential right. What are the preferential right? The first preferential right is that the rate of dividend which these people receive is fixed. The rate of the dividend which these people receive from the business is fixed, number one. And the next point, if the business make profit, first of all, we have to pay the fixed rate of dividend for these people. And then if there is something remaining, so we have to pay for the equity shareholders. That is point number one. And point number two, at the time of liquidation of the business, at the time of winding gap, winding gap means, for example, when we want to close the business, right? Winding gap, right? Let me mention here. Winding gap. What is winding gap? Winding gap means when we want to close the business. When you want to close the business, first of all, you have to repay the capital of preference, and then you have to pay the capital of equity shareholders. Let me give a simple example. Let us say, for example, we have received 1 lakh capital from preference share. How much from preference share? 1 lakh preference share. And of course, this one is a 10% dividend. What dividend? 10% dividend. So if it is a 10% dividend, it means out of 1 lakh, 10,000 should be paid as what? As dividend. So at the end of the year, if business made profit, first of all, you have to pay 10,000 for the preference shareholders. If there is something remaining, then you have to pay for whom? For common or equity shareholders. Let me give a simple example. For example, in 2017, business made, for example, 10,000 profit. In 2000, for example, 18, let us say, for example, business made 20,000 profit. Let us say, for example, in 2019, business made, for example, 1 lakh profit. How much profit? 1 lakh profit. Let us also mention, for example, 2016 here. Let us say in 2016, business made only, for example, 8,000 profit, right? Let us say we expect in 2020, the business makes 0 profit. How much profit? 0 profit. Let me change the marker here. Let us say like this, this one. Now, if these are the conditions, how much will be the profit for equity, for preference shareholders? In 2016, how much profit we made? We made only 8,000 profit. So if you made 8,000 profit, the portion of the profit that we have to pay for preference shareholders is equal to how much? 10,000. So 8,000 is less than this one. So it means the whole amount of 8,000 will be paid for which group? For preference shareholders. And there will be 0 profit for equity shareholders. Let us go for 2017. The portion of the profit that we have to pay is 10,000, but business also made 10,000. So again, the whole profit will be paid for whom? For preference shareholders. These are the points. In 2018, the profit is 20,000. Out of the 20, 10,000 will be paid for this group, and the remaining 10,000 will be paid for this group. Right? 10. In 2019, profit is 1 lakh. Out of 1 lakh, again, 10,000 will be paid for this group, 90,000 will be paid for this group. In 2020, let us say profit is, let us assume that profit is 0. If there is 0 profit, so these people again will not receive anything, right? So this is the difference between the preference shareholders and debt holders. In the case of debt holders, whether the business make profit or not, we have to pay. But in the case of preference shareholder, they receive profit only if there is a profit. And of course, preference shareholder is called hybrid security. Hybrid security means they have some feature from debt, and also they have some features from equity. Why they have some features from debt? Because the rate of dividend is fixed. And why they have features from equity? Because if there is no profit, so they will not receive anything from the business. This is the point that you have to understand regarding preference shareholder. And of course, there are several types of shareholders, several types of preference shareholder, but we're not going to discuss this one. The second point is common shareholders. Common shareholders are those shareholders which they do not have preferential right. So they receive the profit after preference, and also at the time of winding gap. So they receive their capital after the capital distribution after the capital distribution for preference shareholders. So these were the points regarding the types of or source of fund, right? And then, of course, the common shareholders can be basically cannot be divided, but can be portioned into, we can say, retained earning and reserve and surpluses and so on. Or also we can say the capital itself that we will discuss inshallah later on. As you can see here itself, right? You can see here equity share capital or equity capital and of course retained earning. If there is any retained earning, if there is any reserve, if there is any surplus and so on, all of them are a part of what? Part of equity. And generally can be called as equity shareholder fund. Let me discuss one more point regarding the cost of capital and risk from the company perspective, and of course risk and return from the shareholder perspective or fund holder perspective, right? So first of all, let me discuss from the company perspective. Let us say from the company perspective, from the company's perspective, from the company's perspective, one, if we go from the company's perspective, so we have to make two columns here, three columns basically. Make three columns here. One column make for source of fund, sources of fund. Second column make for cost, and next column make for what? For risk, right? Or first of all, make for risk and then make for what? For cost. Risk and then risk, and then make for what? For cost, right? Under source of fund, mention equity. Equity, and of course, under risk, we'll discuss, and of course, mention under this one. The second point is debt. So debt. Source of fund, debt, and equity. So regarding cost as well as risk. And the second one, mention the second point. Mention from the fund provider's perspective. Right? So from the fund provider perspective, once again, it is the same. Source of fund, risk, but this time instead of cost, we have to mention what? Return, right? Then you have to mention equity, and of course mention what? Mention debt. Mention what? Debt. D-E-B-T. Debt, right? See, if we go from the, let me highlight this point as well here. Let me highlight it. Okay. Let me take the marker here. So, see, if we, okay, let me highlight this one as well. Bullet and as well as highlight. Bullet this one and give a color also. This color is fine. Let us highlight this one also. Bullet and highlight. Good. Then come back to this point. Good. See now, if we consider the cost of fund or source of fund, sometime in the previous chapter we discussed more risk, more cost, right? Also, sometime we discussed the cost of this one is more, the cost of this one is less, the risk of this one is more, the risk of this one is less. So sometimes students get confused that what is this one? Why there is more risk, more cost, more return? Several things are there. So in order to avoid this confusion, so I have to discuss the risk and cost from two perspectives. One, or first one, we have to discuss from the company perspective. It means from the company itself, from the joint stock, for example, company perspective. And the second one, we have to discuss from the fund provider's perspective, those who provide fund. So the cost and the risk for these people is different, and the cost and risk for these people is different, right? Why? Because when you purchase, let us say, for example, A purchase something from whom, for example, for B. A purchase from B and B sell it. So in this case, A is the purchaser and B is the seller. So the same transaction for A is called for A, it is a kind of expenses. Why? Because A purchase and B sale. For sale, it is a type of revenue, right? So the same thing is in the business. When the fund provider provides something to the business, when they expect something, that is a kind of return for them. But when the company pay that return, that's a kind of cost for the company, right? So the same transaction from one side it is cost, from other side it is a type of revenue or it's a type of return. So we have to clarify this point regarding debt as well as equity. See, that is why I have mentioned three columns. One column for source of fund, next column for risk, and the next column for the cost. In the case of equity, from the company perspective, not from the shareholder perspective, from the company perspective, risk is less. Why risk is less? Because as I mentioned here, in this case, there is a profit and loss sharing. There is a profit and loss sharing. If the business made profit, so they will receive something. If the business did not make any profit, so they will not receive anything from the business. So that is why the risk for this group or for this source of fund is less. Why once again it is less? Because they will not receive anything if there is nothing in the business. But the risk for this group of fund is more from the company perspective. Why this is so? Because they receive the fixed rate of interest. Whether the business made profit or not, so they will receive. If they receive, so definitely this is more. But the second thing is regarding the cost. The cost of debt is less from the company perspective. For example, the cost of debt might be 10%, might be 8%, and so on. Why the cost is less? Because the risk is, later on we'll discuss from the fund provider perspective, the risk for the fund provider is less. If the risk for fund provider is less, so they expect less return from the company, right? So we will discuss, inshallah, this one. It will be clarified when we discuss this point. But for the time being, just consider, I'm telling you that the cost of debt from the company perspective is less. But the cost of debt from the company, cost of equity from the company perspective is more. Why this is so? Because in the case of equity, whatever profit is available in the business, they will receive it. Whatever profit is available in the business, they will receive it. If there is 1 lakh profit, they will receive 1 lakh. If there is 2 lakh, they will receive 2 lakh. If there is million profit, so they will receive the million profit. So that is why we can say from the company perspective, cost of this group of fund is more. Why cost of this one is less? Because they receive the fixed rate of interest. Whether the business made millions and millions profit, they receive 5,000, 10,000 or whatever, a specific amount of profit, that's it, right? Let us say, for example, we can say we have taken 1 lakh loan from the market at 10%. So the rate of interest, so the amount of interest is 10,000. Even the business made 1 lakh profit, they will receive 10,000. Even the business made million and million, they will receive only 10,000, right? So that is why their cost is fixed. So their interest is fixed. So that is why cost is less. Cost for this one is less from the company perspective, but risk is more. Why risk is more? Because they will receive, definitely. They will not postpone it. They will not, we can say, cancel it. But for this group, risk is more. Why risk is more? Risk is less. Why risk is less? Because they will not receive anything. They will receive, that is why risk is more. They will not receive, that is why risk is less. They will receive fixed amount, that is why cost is less. They will receive whatever is available, that is why cost is more. Second, if we consider from the fund provider perspective, right? If we consider from the fund provider perspective, risk of equity is more. See, from the company perspective, risk is less. But from the fund provider perspective, risk is more. Why risk is more? Because they share in the profit as well as in the loss. They share in the profit as well as in the loss. If the business made million profit, so they will receive profit. If the business made, for example, million loss, so they have to suffer the loss as well, right? That is why risk is more. But in the case of debt, risk is less. Why risk is less? Because they participate only in the profit, not of course in the loss. They receive their fixed amount of profit. They will not participate in the risk of the business, and that is why it is riba, it is sud, and it is haram, right? So we should not take, of course, debt. Why? Because they provide fund and they receive the fixed profit. They participate in the profit only. But this group of people, of course, participate in the loss as well as in the profit. So that is why their risk is more. right? If risk is more, so definitely return also should be more. Why? Because when the fund provider provide fund to the business, if risk of the bus company is more, so they expect more return as well, right? On the other side, regarding debt, as risk of these people as risk, so cost is also cost, return is also risk. It means they expect less return from the business. Why they expect less return? Because they have accepted less risk. If you accept more risk, you will receive more return. If you accept less risk, you will receive less return as well. Is that correct? So let me discuss one more point here. The return, see these two returns. The return from the fund provider perspective is the cost from the company perspective. See this one. If return or expected return of the fund provider is more, cost of the company is also more, right? So this one directly linked with this one. Directly linked with this one. So their expectation of return is more, for the company cost is more. Why? Because their return is cost for the company. Or cost of company is return for these people. Did you get my point? Second one, this one, regarding debt. So they expect less return from the company. And that is why it is less cost from the company perspective. Is that clear? So these are the points, right? For these people, next group, next point. Let me take another marker here. For this group, risk from the equity shareholder perspective is more. For you, it is more risk. For the other party, it means for the company, less risk. Why this is so? Because your return is the cost for the company. Your cost is the return from the company, right? And for the second group, so they have less risk. For the fund provider, cost is risk is less, but for the company, of course, risk is more. So please take this point in your mind while discussing the equity, the risk, the return, and the cost, and so on.